Welcome, everybody. We're going to be looking at Unit 8 content tonight, which is a Python review. And the goal of the evening is basically to cover all the what's called the key language features of the Python language. All of you taking this course have already had a full 3-credit course in Python. And some of you, that material is fresh in your mind because maybe you're taking it right now or you took it last semester. And for some of you, it might have been a year ago. And maybe that the usage of Python is like fading from your memory a little bit. So my goal here for the evening is to cover all the major language features and then start working on the exercises. I'm also going to take a look at why it's important, what tools to use, and then at the tail end, time permitting, I'm going to talk a little bit about the GitHub platform as a code repository that you might want to consider using. And I have a little tutorial established for you if you guys want to explore that. There's no assignment related to that, but it's just good to know. So the first thing I do want to talk about is this very first link at the top of the page, and I'm going to delve over to the article here and take a look. So this comes from a website. You can see this article is a little bit dated, right? So this is like 5 years ago. But even at that point in time, it was very clear that Python had already become the primary language for doing this type of work in terms of a programming language. And there's a number of reasons for it. One of the primary reasons is Python, compared to other traditional programming languages, such as C or C++ or Java or C Sharp, or any of those styles of languages, it is a lot easier to learn. It's also highly flexible. It is not as strict as those other languages in terms of syntax and usage. And just on a real bare bones level, think about in Python that I can set up a variable and put any data type into it. If I was in a language such as Java, I'd have to know my data type very explicitly and declare it when I'm creating the variable, right? So there's a deeper level of knowledge that's necessary. So you got to understand your data types before you can just start throwing data around. Python is highly flexible, and because of that flexibility, has become the tool of choice. Very easy to learn the syntax. What I always tell my students is sometimes you can guess the syntax and get it right, which is kind of weird, right? Well, let's try this. Hey, it worked. That type of thing. And I think that's actually kind of cool, right? And so it is really well suited for a lot of this stuff. It's also very useful for both processing language, for processing numbers and lists of information. And it does so very elegantly, often with a very small amount of code compared to other languages. So one of the reasons why we like to use it. So if you start perusing this article, they start to talk about, why it's a good language. Why is it a good option for data analysis? So I mentioned, for example, easy to learn, well supported. Lots of people use it. So there's huge communities that support this. So like if you throw a question out on Stack Overflow, you're going to get a million answers, or if you're just doing research, or if you're using an AI engine to help you code stuff, it excels at working with Python. It's very flexible. The other thing that we talk about, especially in this program, since we are, data and AI, a lot of the stuff that's developed for machine learning or deep learning or neural networks or generative AI, all that stuff, almost as a rule, is developed in Python. And as a result, there's tons of free libraries that allow you to do that kind of work that you can add to your Python code. So it allows you to basically rapidly develop things without having to start from scratch. And I think this is really the most interesting aspect of it. It's also scalable, so I can do really simple programs, or I can create these huge powerhouse programs as well. Lots and lots of libraries. Some of the libraries do build off of the old C libraries, which also has a big set of libraries. but like you see, like a couple of the ones that they're pointing out here, like if you're doing data analysis, these are libraries that you'll probably end up using at some point. Um, Lots of different things are available. Notice that they have graphics and visualization tools, so that like the types of charts and graphs that we were creating in Excel, you can do that stuff in Python too. That's pretty weird, right? They have libraries built, specifically for doing that. And they have lots of tools that are related to data analytics, lots of tools related to AI. Heck, if you're into game development or website development or whatever it is, there's probably libraries for it. And they're probably free and open source and easy to download and add to your own code. So the writing's been on the wall for a while. Now, mind you, once again, that this is dated 2020. If anything, that that Python is essential for data analysis is even more entrenched now than it was 5 years ago. And one of the reasons why both in our data analytics program we chose this language for instruction, and even in our web program now we're shifting over to Python. So one of the things we're talking about doing is eliminating Java from our web program and just doing Python. By the way, for anybody here that's taken the first Python course, the 152081, that one also has a follow-up course if you're looking for an elective to fill your elective slot in your degree. Advanced Python is a good choice, right? And that's one that's offered. It does have some stuff in it that's tailored for web students, but I still think it's valuable for anybody here in the AI data program as well. And I would recommend it if you're looking like, what course do I put there? That would be one of those that I would suggest. All right, so let's now go back to some of this other content here. I do have a video linked up here from LinkedIn Learning. This is a kind of a collection of Python stuff in this video course. I'm not going to click through to it, but if you want some excellent Python tutorials in the form of videos, there you go. I recommend certain ones that you watch, but you could watch the whole thing. Right? The other thing that I did is I went through and I provided you guys with 2 links here for language references. So if you want to really look something up and see how it works, in my mind, I think the W3 Schools site is probably one of the more useful ones. At one of the other institutions where I teach, in lieu of a textbook, they use this material here on this website in lieu of a textbook. And so it has a complete breakdown of all these topics here that you can see. Right, some stuff some stuff you might not. They also have some of those high-end libraries that we talk about. So when they talk about modules, all 3 of these are used for data science. They talk a lot about matplotlib, which is one that we will experiment with in this course, but notice it is for plotting, pie charts, histograms, etc. That's kind of the primary one for doing that. There's also information here on doing machine learning in Python, and also integrating with a database of various sorts, complete reference, module reference, and it goes on and on and on. Right? So excellent resource. And if you're not familiar with the site W3 Schools, W3 stands for World Wide Web, and this is the World Wide Web Consortium official tutorial site. The World Wide Web Consortium is the standards granting body for the internet. So in other words, all the languages that are used on the internet, especially the first 3 that you see here, those are the primary languages of the internet. This is the official declarer of what those standards are. So if you wanted to learn that technology, this is the go-to site. But you will notice as you look across the top here, all the other languages and tools that they also teach here. And so I love this site, both for learning, if you've never learned a topic before, but it's also super useful if you just want to go, oh, how do you do that in this language? I forgot. And so you just go in here, look up the topic that you want. So for example, if you want to remember how to do, I don't know, an if-else statement in Python, you can just come here, look at the examples, hit their little try it editor, and it launches an on-screen coding tool where you can experiment with the code and see how it works, right? So this is super, super helpful. The one thing I do say to all of my IT students, right, especially as you're learning how to code, it is almost impossible, right, for the human brain to go, oh yeah, I've got all the Python language features memorized. You know, it's not going to happen. And don't even put it in your head that you're going to do that. You know, it's kind of like trying to memorize the contents of a dictionary, except the problem is a dictionary probably won't change that often, but the Python language a year or two from now might get revised. It might be up to version 4, and they might come up with new syntax. So there's no way you're going to internalize that and keep it in your brain. So one of the challenges of us working in IT is having that a ready reference, an updated ready reference to what the language does now, right? And you don't have to memorize the stuff, but you do need to know how to find it to utilize it. Basic stuff you'll remember, complicated things, you might forget the nuance that makes it work. And a site like this is beautifully helpful for doing that. So it's one of my go-to sites in a lot of different ways. The other one that I have linked up here is the actual Python language site. This is the official, site for the Python language. Python is open source, right? So it's freely available. You don't have to pay for it in any way. You can download the latest versions of the libraries. It looks like the latest version right now is 3.132. What I always caution people though is, just because it's the latest version doesn't mean it's maybe the one you should use. A lot of times when it comes to programming and software tools, sometimes you're better off with the latest stable version. Those latest stable versions are often marked as LTS, long-term support, meaning they know it works well, they offer support for it, etc. If it's a test build or a beta version or the latest iteration, sometimes it's not necessarily wise to switch to it quite yet. Right? If you learned Python with us here at Gateway within the last year, you've probably been on Python 3.11 and above would be my guess, or 3.10 and above. The one that I recommend here in the course shell, I think is 3.12. And I marked it as the latest stable build. 13 might be stable now too. I'm not really sure. So good ones to bookmark. Why the Python language site is helpful is if you really want to dig into the documentation for something, this is a really good site. If you want to update your libraries, this is a good site. And there's a really big community here where you can interact with people, you can look at their wiki or whatever, and get really good answers for really tough questions, right? And whatever language you ever are coding in, by the way, it probably has a site like this for the parent language, and it's always worth investigating. Like if you're full-on professional Python programmer, you're probably coming here all the time to get information or interact. All right. The next thing I do want to talk about is the tools that we need to do our work. Now, depending on who you took the class with, anybody that took the class with me, my real strong recommendation for a coding platform is to download and install the Anaconda distribution. And by the way, in what I call Linux speak, people never call it a distribution, they call it a distro, right? They don't want to pronounce those extra syllables in the process. But Anaconda is a packaged collection of Python related tools built for data science. And what I'll do here is I will take you take it to the download page here, but I'm going to take you to the home page here, and I want you to see how they are pushing themselves these days. In the past, they used to say this is the tool for data science. Now they're saying it's for AI, and they're right on both accounts, honestly. But it is built for doing AI and data science. That's what one of the reasons why we like this tool. Ultimately, when you do the download on this, and if for whatever reason, maybe you still don't have this on your machine, you got a new machine or something, you can come here and download it again. They'd like you to register with an email address, but that's optional. You can click the skip registration and go right to the download page if you wish. What I have noticed about their distributions is they're sometimes a couple versions old on the language library. So this might not be 3.13. It might be something else. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just see where it takes us. Okay, they're on 3.12. So that's the one I would recommend. And you can see that they have versions for all the major platforms, right? So whether you're, a Windows person, a Mac person, or a Linux person. I think I'm going to make the assumption that most of us are Windows people, right? And then I know there's a fair number of my students in this program that are also Mac people. This works equally well on both platforms, by the way. If you do have this already installed, my only thing I might recommend is that you might upgrade your Python libraries, and it probably isn't necessary if you installed it like last semester, but if it was a year or so ago, you might want to update just the libraries. If you're looking to update just the libraries, go to the Python site and download the libraries. It basically just decompresses to a folder on your hard drive, and then any Python program that runs or any Python program that is coded refers to those libraries, both to run and to validate the code. There are some feature changes in Python, like when we went from, I don't know, the early 3 versions, like I think up through like version 7 or 8. There was some new features that weren't included, and when we got like to 9 and above, there were some new things that were added that I think are pretty useful. So I wouldn't necessarily upgrade unless you're not up to 3.9. So that's my advice. Okay. So if you're at below 3.9, I would do the upgrade. If you do get this tool installed, so I'm going to just kind of run it really quick. It comes as a distribution, and the distribution has a tool called the Anaconda Navigator, which I'm launching right now on my screen. This will come up with an interface, and you can see it's like doing a bunch of stuff in the background here. And I will kind of say this also, I usually don't launch the Navigator personally, unless I need an obscure tool and I forget how to get to it. But it is up on the screen and running now. But it gives you this this interface here that shows you all the Anaconda related tools on your system, whether they're installed or not installed, and gives you the option to install them if they're not, right? So some of these things you will be familiar with already because we covered them in the Python class. For example, the Spider IDE was the one that we used in, at least when I'm teaching Python, that's the one I prefer to use because it's part of this distribution. It's focused on Python. You're not coding other languages in it. And the other big tool was the Jupyter Notebook. I'm going to attempt to do most of my coding for this class in the Jupyter Notebook. I might waffle on that a little bit. I'm not always a super huge fan of it, but it is kind of the preeminent tool that's used by most data scientists and AI developers, by the way, especially when they're experimenting with little bits of code, right? So those are kind of like the 2 primary tools in this platform. The other ones that are worthy of mention are both PyCharm and VS Code. Those are other IDEs by different companies. PyCharm comes from JetBrains, And JetBrains, I think I have a link to it back in the course shell. But JetBrains arguably has some of the better IDEs out there. IDE, if you don't remember, stands for Integrated Development Environment. So you can like write your code, output your code, debug your code, and handle all the stuff with it all in one environment, right? That's an IDE. PyCharm, at least with a number of professional developers that I know, is kind of the go-to Python tool for many of them. The other one that's super popular is VS Code. VS Code, some of you might know this tool already, is completely free. It's a Microsoft product. I will bring that up on screen and kind of demonstrate it a little bit later. PyCharm, however, is not free. The thing that I will say about PyCharm, like if you go to the JetBrains website, and actually, okay, it's got a link right to it. You can tell I was looking at it before. This is a fantastic product. It really is. However, here's the big however, it is not free, right? There are free educational licenses for students. And the way you obtain the license is go to the education page on the website. And you'll notice free licenses for students and teachers. You click on that link. And before you go downloading the product, and please be mindful of that, come up here, sign up for a free educational license, use your gateway email account, right? Because if it's got a .edu at the end, they pretty much sail you through. If you're using your personal Gmail, they're like, that's not happening. Show me a picture of your student ID. Show me your transcripts or something like that. But if you have a .edu active email address, you pretty much sail through it. And then you get this like license key that can allow you to basically unlock all of their products for free. You have to renew it, I think, once a year or something like that. But that's a small price to pay for excellent product. I tend to not use this in the classroom environment, but I do want to point it out to you guys so that you're aware. The other one that's kind of one that you will be learning as you kind of move forward in the program is we actually have a course in programming in the R language. That's another programming language variant of Python that's used specifically for data analysis and visualization. So we have a whole 3-credit course in that. Highly employable skill, by the way, just to know that language and those tools. So if you're interested, you can install that. But honestly, I would wait until you take that course. If I'm not mistaken, the R class typically happens in the summertime. Usually Christian's teaching it or Christopher's. One of those two is usually teaching it. VS Code is one that is pretty prominent too. So I'm going to kind of bring that one up on the screen. And you know what? I'm going to do just a quick search for it here. This is a product that comes from Microsoft. And it is completely free. It is not the full-blown version of Visual Studio, which is their professional grade product, which also codes in Python. This is a free, I'll call it extensible IDE, meaning that it's capable of coding in just about any language when you add the right extensions to it. I do happen to have it loaded up here on my machine, so I will kind of demonstrate this as we're working through it tonight. And I'll just give you an example here. When I was working with my students at a different, okay, and of course, getting little error messages here, but it is capable of coding in Python. I just wanted to show you the look of the product. And it is a fairly powerful IDE. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but when I teach at this other school, they, you know, I'm not going to say they insist that I use this product, but they recommend that I use this product because it is free. And this is a tool they want their students to be used to using. One really neat feature about this is all of the different extensions that you can add. So they have this like extensions library here. And for example, if I start coding a Python file and I save it, this little thing pops up saying, hey, do you want to install this Python tool and that Python tool and this Python tool? And of course, you say yes to the key ones, and it's kind of automatic, right? Some of those things. But there's also a lot of stuff that you can throw in here that's maybe not necessary. So it can get a little convoluted, which is one of the reasons I have an issue with it. Another reason that people really dig this is they also have this tool available here. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with what I'm looking at here, but since you guys are all AI students, and I'm just trying to make sure that yeah, they have different versions of it. But basically, Copilot is an AI engine for your IDE. I want you to think about that. So now they're starting to take AI and build it right into the coding tool. And you know what? I'm not launching it right now because I don't want to, like, have you guys just use AI to do all your work. But it has potential. And in fact, like, if you think of all the stuff that we did in the Python class, like, I'd give you an assignment and then you guys would go home and try to code it, and we'd code through it in class. You can take those assignment descriptions, drop them into Copilot, press enter, 2 seconds later, you got all the code. And it's pretty spot on, by the way. Right? So is that cheating? Okay, in the past, we would certainly call it cheating. In the modern day, we're kind of starting to change our mindset that it's becoming a necessary tool for the acceleration of workflow. However, how do you know what it's creating is good in, solving your actual problem? You still have to know what the code is and does, right? So you still have to learn the fundamentals. And if you know the fundamentals and then start using tools like that, that's where you get really powerful, folks, right? So you still got to learn the language fundamentals. Which tool you use in this class to code with, I'm going to leave that on you, right? I'll probably experiment with a couple tonight as we're kind of moving forward. But, I think that kind of gives you like some of the basic ones, for usage here, in this class. All right. So if you don't have Python, you got to install it. If you do have Python, chances are it's probably okay. You can use the one that you have. There are, some alternatives, and I know that I always show this one when I teach my Python classes. Every once in a while, I get somebody who's like on a Chromebook, right? And you shouldn't really be. And you can't really install stuff like an IDE on a Chromebook. But you know what? If you're on the web, you could access this tool. So this is a fully running IDE. So it runs in the browser. I can, this is just some sample code, but just to show you, it even creates GUI programs. This is a GUI program, like wow, right? As opposed to the old school kind of, it's not a very pretty GUI program, but it is a GUI program. Anyhow, this is a fully functional IDE working on the version 3 of Python, right? It works in the browser. So in a pinch, you could use this to write Python code. There are a few other web-based IDEs. Visual Studio Code, for one, they've kind of like put theirs out and then pulled it back a couple of times. The people that make the brackets, and I forget what they call it now. This is a big product for web developers. This is kind of like Visual Studio Code, but they also have this browser-based version now that runs in your browser that also codes Python. I haven't experimented with it a lot, but it seems very promising. I'm just kind of throwing it out there as well. So there you go. Lots of different options for writing your Python code. The Jupyter Notebook, I'm going to go ahead and bring that one up. That one is installed on my system. This one is also browser-based, but just so we're clear, it runs in the web browser, but it's running from your local system. It's not going out to the internet, right? So it's still an installed product. Just the interface for it is on um, your own machine directly. Um, if you guys remember, I don't know if I have any examples here that are recent, but like when we were coding in the Python class, I think I demonstrated this. So this is an example of what Jupyter Notebook looks like. The one neat thing about Jupyter Notebook is your code and the output of your code are in the same environment. And I can do more than one program on a page and then save it as a notebook, right? And what this allows you to do is like take your code, see what it did, try a different version, see what it did, and you have it all in one spot that you can refer to. So pretty useful from that regard. And for whatever reason, like whenever I would go to either data training or AI training and somebody's coding in Python, this was the tool they were using almost exclusively. So I'm going to try to do that. I might get uncomfortable and switch over to one of the others. We'll see. We'll see as we're rolling. All right. All right. Going back here, I got links to PyCharm. I have links to Visual Studio Code here directly to the Jupyter Notebook site. But then I also want to show you a couple of the references that I dropped in here on the page. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through the reference guide that I have here to cover all the major language features. So first things first, when you guys did the Python course with me, if you did it with me, this is a link to all the lecture videos from that course, unit by unit, right? All in one spot. So if you want to like relive the glory of the lecture videos, here's a quick little list of it, including the topics. And I didn't have the topics listed before, so I added those today. So if you just want to look at what lists are or dictionaries or whatever, you can just go right in there and fast forward and listen to me drone on about it from our old Python book. All right, let's take a look at this quick reference guide though. And, this was generated, by the help of Claude, which I did this afternoon, right? So the Claude AI engine, it's been one of my little projects basically to experiment with as many of these different AI tools as I possibly can. And there's so many of them now. But when I was at the conference, I got some super great tips from other instructors. A couple of the instructors told me, oh, yeah, Claude codes better than the other guys do. I'm like, really? Okay. Right. Oh, okay, fine, I'll try it. But I didn't, of course, ask it a code question. But what I did is I asked it for a reference guide for all the Python language fundamentals. So I'm like, you know what? Let's see what it does. So I dropped, a prompt into the engine, and I forget exactly how I prompted it. And then it created this table of contents. So these are all the things that we're going to talk about for the most part. And then started by giving me examples of all of it. So this is going to be kind of my approach here, is let's start with the basics, just to kind of review. What I will do is I will work with the Jupyter Notebook right now. So I do have it open here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Python 3 file. If you guys are using a different IDE, use whatever way you create a new Python file if you want to code along. If you just want to watch, that's fine, right? This is just to kind of refresh some of our skills. Am I going to type every example in? Probably not. I'm just going to kind of look at key ones just to kind of refresh how things work. All right, I got to get my caps lock off here, but let's start with the most fundamental of Python commands, the print function, right? Remember, this is like day one, like Python coding. It's like, this is how we put stuff on the screen, folks. So you type print in lowercase, a set of parentheses, and then either a set of double or single quotes, and then you add your text in between. We'll do our standard hello world, right? And then whichever little, let's call it cell that I'm in, I think that's what they call them, their cells. If you're in that cell, it's highlighted green, you can hit the run button and it will output your code. Right, so that's the print function. Print also has the capability of of doing math brute force. You guys recall all that, right? Right, so that's just putting stuff on the screen. The print statement usually processes strings. If you put other operations inside those parentheses, it does whatever it does, converts it to a string, and then puts it on the screen. One real important takeaway with Python always is if we're typing something at the screen, it comes in as a string, even if it's a number. And when we put it back up on the screen, it's always a string, even if it's a number. That's a pretty important takeaway. All right, let me go back to my little reference guide here if I can find it. There we are. All right, so basic output. So we did a hello world, right? Here with multiple arguments. So in other words, if I take this statement, it's going to print out that text, and then we're adding the number 42 to it. If you guys want to try that, you can very simply copy and paste. Oops, I just closed my untitled document there. Thank goodness it's still there. And you can paste that in. So this comma becomes kind of a separator, and it really is a primitive concatenation mark. Remember that word concatenation, which means to join strings together. If I run this one, right, it takes this text, adds a space after it, and then concatenates whatever this is. It could be more text. It could be a mathematical operation. Could be a variable name. Doesn't matter. Right. So that's with multiple arguments. I have this tendency to do Alt-Tab to switch screens, so I apologize. You can also take variables that store strings or variables that store numbers, and then you can use what we call the F-string approach. They call it formatted strings here. And notice the Python version 3.6 or above for this one to work. But this technique, we formally in programming, we call this string interpolation. And the reason for that is we're able to directly inject the variable name or whatever. It could be a math operation too, or a function call, directly into the string output. So I can skip this type of approach. I don't have to use a comma, you know. You do have to have the letter F at the beginning, and then you just call the variable name in, or what the function or the math or whatever it is, and it will do the output directly. This has become my favorite way to do Python output, by the way. I usually, this is my go-to now. This type of feature was available in some other programming languages. One I learned it in was the Apple Swift language. And I'm like, man, this is really slick. You know, I wish Python would do it. And then all of a sudden Python was doing it, you know. And I just like this approach because when you're formatting your string, you know, all the spaces are preserved and you can just use the variables right in mind. I think it's just an easier way to operate. Notice that you can also do some formatting and stuff too, right? And what they're showing here is blank lines, right? And they're throwing in the format function, which then feeds the data into the brackets. I don't use that technique very often, but it is one that you can play with. There's also what we call escape sequences. Do you guys remember what that does? It gives you a blank line. So it's like, you know, like pressing enter in the middle of your text. This one gives you a tab stop, so it moves you over. And then this double backslash allows me to put a backslash inside my text output. Right? So if you want a backslash in your text output, you need two backslashes. Right? Those are called escape sequences. The other thing that we can do, so this is like basic output. The print command is how we get stuff to the console and into many other formats. But we can also do input from the user, and there's an input function, right? This one, you know what? Let me go ahead and just grab all this code. And And once again, I'm trying to do my Alt tab and I shouldn't. And so we have a variable that's going to hold the result of this prompt to the user. So this will come up on the screen. The user has to type in their name, and then you output it back to the screen. So let's just go ahead and run this so you can see. So enter your name. I'm just going to say whatever, hello, whatever, right? And so this is the primary way for a console-based program that we capture information from the screen from the user. Anything a user types in comes in as a string. If you want to use it to do mathematical operations, you have to expressly convert to a numeric format, a float or an int. And I don't know if you guys remember that process, but we did do it quite a bit in the Python class. Here's an example of doing that conversion. This is worthy of looking at. I think it's notable enough to actually do it. Right, so we're asking somebody to enter their age. We convert it to an integer, right? So it's basically the input function captures text that feeds directly into the integer function that converts it to an integer and then stores it in age as a number. And here's another example where we're converting, enter your height in meters, and none of us would be able to answer that one typically, right? But it converts it to a floating point number because, in meters, what would be your height? It probably won't be exactly 2 meters. It'll be like 1.95 or something like that if you're of average height. So that converts to a decimal number. This one I'm not going to run, but if I wanted to, it'd be very easy to output this. I would use the f string method, and I would just type inside here your age is, and then do curly brackets and say age, and your height in meters is, and just put in height. Now, I will tell you, one of the reasons I don't like using the Jupyter Notebook is if I did the same coding in any of the other coding engines, Visual Studio Code, Spider, whatever, it does a lot of autocomplete. The thing about the Jupyter Notebook is you have to manually type it all up. If I was to type that up in Visual Studio Code, and I'll just show you very, very quickly here as it launches, and I'll just quickly make a new file. We'll close these release note things, right? And we'll just call it whatever.py. And I start typing print, and then I do my f string, and then I do my, I start typing stuff, and it like very intuitively guides you and sometimes autocomplete stuff. This isn't even a very elegant example, but it's helpful. It also does syntax highlighting, so like if I want to output that, well, I don't have an age thing created yet, so it's highlighting it yellow. So if I wanted to do that, I would say input what is your age, something like that. Of course, that would need to be converted to a number ideally. Just wrap an input statement around it. But the highlighting and the syntax correcting is very useful. One of the reasons why people like this tool, by the way. I also find this one a little clunky also, but it does have autocomplete, right? And what I always tell people is when you're coding, you owe it to yourself, like if you're a carpenter, how do you know which hammer you like? Well, you try a bunch of hammers, right? You buy one with a fiberglass shaft or a steel shaft, or you get the wood one that you can repair, you know what I mean? And it's a personal preference, and you should try a bunch of different tools and find the one that's a good fit for you. So, all right. We are going to take a break here in just a moment, just so you know that. We're going to, yeah, you know what? This is a good spot to take a break. We'll come back and we'll start to talk about variables and data types. And then hopefully we can get through most of this content here and then move over into coding. All right, folks, I'll see you in about 5 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording here.